What if I told you there's a blind, hairy crab living 2 kilometers under Pacific Ocean that survives by farming toxic bacteria on its own arms and eating them? And what if I told you that scientists only discovered this creature in 2005, and we're still trying to figure out how something this bizarre is even possible? Meet Kiwa hirsuta, better known as a Yeti crab. Its nickname comes from those silky blonde seedy, specialized bristles that cover its claws and underarms like a fuzzy sweater. But this isn't fashion. It's a matter of life and death. In 2005, a team of marine biologists descended in a submersible to explore hydrothermal vents near Easter Island. Footage of deep-sea submersible descending into darkness, what they found clustered around the vents, shocked them. Pale, eyeless crabs, each about 6 inches long, waving their hairy arms back and forth through the superheated, chemically toxic water, like they were conducting an underwater orchestra. At first, scientists had no idea what they were looking at. The behavior seemed completely nonsensical. Hydrothermal vents are essentially underwater volcanoes, spewing water that can reach 750 degrees Fahrenheit and loaded with hydrogen sulfide, a chemical so toxic it would kill most life forms instantly. The environment around these vents is pitch black, crushingly pressurized, and utterly inhospitable. Yet there these crabs were, deliberately positioning themselves in the most toxic zones, waving their arms in what looked like some kind of bizarre ritual. Close-up of Yeti crab claws waving through cloudy vent water when researchers from the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute finally brought specimens to the surface and examined those hairy arms under a microscope. They discovered something astonishing. Those seedy weren't just hair. They were farms. Every single bristle was absolutely covered in filamentous bacteria, billions of them, forming dense bacterial gardens that the crabs were actively cultivating. These weren't random bacteria that happened to settle there. The crabs were deliberately growing them. Here's where it gets wild. Those bacteria are chemosynthetic, meaning they don't get energy from sunlight like plants do. They get it from the toxic chemicals pouring out of hydrothermal vents. The bacteria consume hydrogen sulfide and other compounds that would kill the crab, converting that chemical energy into organic matter. And then, here's the genius part. The Yeti crab scrapes the bacteria off its own arms with specialized mouth parts and eats them. It's farming itself, using its own body as farmland. Think about that for a moment. This crab has evolved to become a living, mobile greenhouse for toxic-loving bacteria, positioning itself in poison zones to fertilize its crops, then harvesting and eating those crops to survive. Researchers estimate that a single Yeti crab can host over 100 million bacterial cells on its CD. That's more bacteria on one crab's arms than there are people in most countries. But the story gets even stranger. The Yeti crab isn't just standing still, letting bacteria grow passively. Scientists observe these crabs performing what they call the wave, rhythmically pumping their claws up and down to the vent fluid in a specific pattern. Footage of multiple crabs doing synchronized waving motion at first. This looked like territorial behavior or maybe a mating display. But Andrew Thurber from Oregon State University discovered the real reason after months of observation. By waving their arms in precise patterns, they're actively exposing their bacterial gardens to the optimal concentration of chemicals. Too close to the vent, and the temperature kills the bacteria. Too far away, and there aren't enough chemicals to feed them. The crabs have figured out the exact sweet spot, and they defend their farming positions aggressively. When another crab gets too close, they don't just fight, they literally try to push each other out of the optimal growing zone. It's territorial warfare over invisible chemical gradients in the pitch-black abyss. Now, here's a detail that should blow your mind. The Yeti crab has no functional eyes. It's completely blind. Yet somehow, these creatures navigate through absolute darkness to locate hydrothermal vents, position themselves in the perfect zone, and maintain their bacterial gardens. Scientists believe they use chemoreceptors to smell or taste the chemical gradients coming from the vents, essentially navigating by following toxic plumes to their source. Imagine being dropped in complete darkness and having to find a specific spot where the air is just poisonous enough. Not too much, not too little. That's what these crabs do every single day of their lives. But wait, it gets even more fascinating. Since that first discovery in 2005, researchers have found several other species of Yeti crabs, each living near different vent systems around the world. There's Kiwa puravida off Costa Rica, Kiwa tayleri in the Southern Ocean near Antarctica, and at least 5 other species we've identified so far. And here's the kicker. Each species farms slightly different types of bacteria. They've essentially developed different agricultural systems based on their local environment, like how humans domesticated different crops in different regions. The Costa Rican species cultivates bacteria that specialize in methane processing. The Antarctic species farms bacteria adapted to much colder vent temperatures. It's diversified farming on an evolutionary scale. Dar. Michel Saganzak from the French Research Institute for Exploitation of the Sea spent years studying these creatures and describes them as ecosystem engineers. The Yeti crabs aren't just surviving in a hostile environment, they're fundamentally changing it. By harvesting toxic chemicals through their bacterial partners, they're actually detoxifying the water around the vents, creating slightly less hostile microzones where other organisms can survive. They're like the pioneers that make a toxic wasteland barely habitable for others. There's still so much we don't understand. How do these crabs molt? When they shed their exoskeleton, do they lose all their bacterial crops and have to start farming from scratch? How do the bacteria initially colonize a young crab? Is there some kind of bacterial inheritance where baby crabs get starter cultures from their parents? Researchers have tried to keep Yeti crabs alive in aquariums to study these questions, but they've all died within days. Without the precise conditions of their natural habitat, the specific temperature, pressure, and chemical composition of vent water, both the crabs and their bacterial partners can't survive. It's a relationship so specialized, so finely tuned to an extreme environment, that we can barely study it outside of expensive deep-sea submersible missions. The discovery of Yeti crabs has completely changed how we think about symbiosis and survival in extreme environments. For decades, scientists assumed that life near hydrothermal vents depended on free-floating bacteria or filter feeding off whatever drifted by. The idea that a creature could actively farm bacteria on its own body, using itself as living agricultural infrastructure, that was science fiction until 2005. And here's why this matters beyond just being incredibly cool. These vents and the weird life around them might hold clues to how life first emerged on Earth. The earliest organisms probably formed in similar toxic, chemical-rich environments. By studying how modern creatures like Yeti crabs partner with bacteria to convert chemical energy into food, we're essentially watching a process that might mirror the origin of life itself. Some astrobiologists are even looking at Yeti crabs as models for how life might exist on other worlds. Jupiter's moon Europa and Saturn's moon Enceladus both have subsurface oceans with hydrothermal activity. If life exists there, it might look something like this. Blind farmers cultivating bacterial gardens in the pitch-black abyss, turning poison into sustenance. But here's something that should concern us. Deep-sea mining companies are increasingly interested in hydrothermal vents because they're rich in valuable minerals, copper, gold, silver, rare earth elements. There are already plans to start mining these vents within the next decade. And when you mine a vent, you destroy it completely. For species like the Yeti crab, which can only survive in these incredibly specific conditions, mining could mean extinction. We'd be wiping out species we barely understand, eliminating creatures that took millions of years to evolve their extraordinary adaptations. Imagine discovering a civilization of blind farmers who spent millennia perfecting their craft in an impossible environment, and then bulldozing their entire world before we even finish learning their language. That's essentially what we're talking about. The Yeti crab lives a world of extremes that would kill us in seconds. Crushing pressure, toxic chemicals, scalding heat, absolute darkness. It thrives by doing something no other creature on Earth does quite the same way. It turned its own body into a farm. It domesticated bacteria. It learned to cultivate poison. And it did all of this without eyes, without light, in one of the most hostile environments imaginable. The next time you think you're having a tough day at work, remember there's a blind crab 2 kilometers underwater, farming toxic bacteria on its arms to stay alive, and somehow making it work. The deep sea covers more than 60 of our planet's surface, yet we've explored less than 5 of it. The Yeti crab was discovered less than 20 years ago. What other bizarre farmers, impossible survivors, and evolutionary marvels are still down there, waiting to rewrite our understanding of what life can do? Every time we send a submersible down, we find something that shouldn't be possible. Yet there it is, waving its hairy arms in the darkness, tending its garden of poison, teaching us that life finds a way, even when that way seems absolutely absurd.